It's the Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White, and this is episode 211. Welcome to the week of 8 May 2022. We've got ransomware, including Conti, event log shellcode, big IP, Clearview, cybercrime laws, DCRAT, or DCRAT, I don't know how you say it. DCRAT sounds better. The Fifth Element, and Jason Wood on this episode of the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more.
All right, I'm Doug White, and this is the Security Weekly News. How resilient is your business? I used to ask that a lot when we did disaster recovery planning, audits, all that kind of stuff. And the universal answer that I almost always got was, well, we'd probably be fine if something happened. I mean, yeah, we're okay. And I was incredibly doubtful about this because usually the minute we started auditing or examining things, it was just like total chaos. And, you know, most organizations can survive a big event, but if you're out of business, meaning like you can't actually do business for more than 48 hours or so, it really starts to get grim fast. And don't forget, if you have enough profile for the press to notice, well, there go your customers too, because the minute all these stories start popping up all over the place and somebody on CNN or on Fox News or whatever says, you know, Bank of X was down today after they got ransomware, you know, the next thing you know, people are going, maybe we should put our money somewhere safer. And all the customers go across the street to that big sign that says, hey, come over here. We were not ransomwared for 645 days. But this week, a school called Lincoln College in Illinois says it will shut down for good this month after 157 years. Now, I know what you're thinking. Tiny liberal arts school goes out of business. Yeah, that happens pretty regular these days. But I didn't really put the story in because it was so shocking that a tiny liberal arts school was going out of business, but it was more about this resilience idea that I wanted everybody to think about a little bit. I mean, you know, this particular shutdown was attributed to a combination of COVID-19, the pandemic, and a ransomware attack. Now, they were struggling already because of the pandemic, but in December of 2021, they got hit with ransomware. And the ransomware basically shut everything they had down because they could not access their administrative data. So most of you have gone to school, whether it was in high school or it was in university or whatever. And when you went to school, you remember they have records, they have grades, they have all this stuff. Well, this school could not access their admissions data, their recruiting data, anything. So basically, they were completely dysfunctional because not very many schools still use those old methods of everything written on a piece of paper somewhere. So if you can't get to the recruiting and admissions data, you can't admit students. So when they finally got back in operation in, wait for it, March of 2022, I mean, that's a long time for, I don't care who you are, whether you're IBM or you're some little tiny school in Illinois. If you're down that long, I mean, you're pretty much done. And a lot of the people who may have applied to the school who are trying to decide, do I want to actually go there, probably couldn't even contact the school, and the school most certainly couldn't contact them. And then the fact that most of these kind of schools are on pretty tight margins anyway, I mean, they lose a few students and it's like everything starts to go south and into death spiral. So, but keep this in mind, because even if you are more resilient and have more money and more people and so forth than a tiny liberal arts school in Illinois, what is your recovery max? I mean, how many days can you actually be down, or how many systems can you actually have offline before your customers are going, what's going on here? And they're going to pack up and go to your competitors. And once that happens, things really do go into a death spiral. So it's never a bad time to start thinking about bad things. In that same light, Costa Rica, a country, this is not a tiny liberal arts school in Illinois, but an actual country, a really nice country, mind you, in Central America. They had to declare a national emergency following attacks by Conti ransomware group. So Conti published a 672 gigabyte data dump, which has all sorts of database, SQL queries and other things from the Costa Rican government in it on their dump site. And so Costa Rica's new president literally walked in on their first day on the job and had a ransomware mess. Now, could this have been politically motivated? I don't think so, because Conti tends to pretty much just be, they don't care, they're just out in it for the money. But the Costa Rican Ministry of Finance was the first reported damage that they had, and they've still not been able to fully evaluate the scope of the incident and what information may have been lost. Now, Conti had contacted Costa Rica after this attack and demanded $10 million as a ransom, which sounds kind of light when you're dealing with government. But the Costa Rican government said, no. That was no in Spanish, but no. And Conti says then that they immediately started, being aggressive about it, said they have attacked the Finance Ministry, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the Social Development and Family Allowances Fund, and the inter-university headquarters of Alajuela. I don't know what that is, but whatever it is. And some of these services now have been down since early in April. So the Costa Rican government is in a state of national emergency due to ransomware. So again, how resilient are you? If you're a country, you might survive, but then again, how long will the citizens of the country put up with this before they get the pitchforks and torches out and, and pointed sticks and stuff and say, these people running things, probably we need to do something about that. Not that I'm encouraging insurrection or anything. I'm just saying, keep it in mind. Apparently, it's now been shown that you can inject shellcode into Windows event logs. It's pretty interesting. I saw that headline. I was like, well, that's an interesting idea. And basically, as our detection systems get smarter, that they're behavioral, they've got, different kinds of machine learning going on to try and spot this sort of stuff. People that want to attack you have to find more stealthy means of hiding things. And so this Windows event log is a means of hiding shellcode from smarter and smarter detection systems. So the report was from Kaspersky, and there was some other information from Mandiant in this article. But Kaspersky found they found something in their behavior-based and anomaly software on a customer computer. So this is a cloud-based kind of thing, I'm presuming, from what it said. And they began analyzing it, and they basically said, quote, it was a very targeted campaign, and it was using a large set of tools, both custom and commercial, which are detailed in the article. If you're interested, you can read it. Part of the identified attack, though, was the injection of shellcode into event logs for KMS or key management services on Windows machines. And it was a malware dropper that had been injected, and then that injected the shellcode into the key management services file. So the dropper basically copied a legitimate file, weirfault.exe, which is a Windows file, and it copies it into a folder called C/Windows/tasks, and then it drops an encrypted binary, which is called werl.dll, which is an actual Windows file, only this is, of course, not an actual Windows file. This is something else. And so basically that DLL is used by Windows error reporting, WER, but Windows error reporting, so it looks like a DLL hijack type attack for that component of this whole thing. But then, of course, something somewhere has to point to this DLL. And so Somayadeep Basu, an intern at Mandiant Red Team, published all the source code for how this was done on GitHub. So you can go there and get that. There's links to the article. But of course, we all know the minute that stuff gets published to GitHub, people will start using it. So Kaspersky said this was already being used in the wild, but that it will likely become much more widely used now that it is out in public. So definitely something you may want to read up on and see what you think. I did mention the big IP story last week, but this new report basically says that this exploit that we reported on Friday in big IP equipment from F5 is being actively exploited in the wild now. So now that it's known, it's been published, it is being used. The vulnerability, if you recall, is a faulty authentication approach in the iControl REST, which is the big IP sort of configuration and management web interface on these devices. So this is your management network facing website that you should never expose to the public or to the internet or anywhere else, but people do all the time. The vulnerability basically allows a whole series. There was 3 separate issues. There were different types of buffer overflows, and there were heap overflows, buffer overflows, and so forth, which allowed someone who can access the management interface to pretend to be an administrator account. And you could do that without a password, mind you, and that in turn allowed you to access all the devices which are associated and attached to this particular device and this application. And so once you can do that, of course, you can execute remote code. And so if you're using big IP, they do have a list of all the devices that are subject to this. They have patches and mitigations if you aren't able to patch. And there were some older devices that they said they were not going to patch. But all that together means you probably should get on that if you're using this type of equipment and make sure you're not vulnerable to this, because the more it gets public, the more people are going to be attacking that in the wild. So here's a name we haven't seen in a while, Clearview AI. I mean, there was a time when we reported on that all the time. I haven't actually seen a reference to that. I know they still exist, but there hadn't been a reference to them in a while. But Clearview AI, if you don't remember, is a company that pretty much had controversy all the way down the line. I mean, ever since they first started selling software. They basically had originally primarily targeted sales to law enforcement and government entities with facial recognition software. And there was obviously a lot of controversy about facial recognition software being sold to police and government so that they could, try to identify people on various cameras and things like that, which, I have my police hat, which is like, that's a good thing. And I also have my paranoia hat, which is like, that could be a little scary. But the real controversy, of course, came from them bragging about scraping billions of images from social media all the way back to into 2020. So they were talking about how they were going on social media and using their AI systems to scrape pictures off people's public-facing social media stuff, which, part of me is, again, going, well, you put it up there. You shouldn't be complaining when somebody scrapes it. But basically, they were scraping this. They used these images to build their training databases, which allowed their AI that had been trained on this massive database to be able to look at a picture and then see if they could find a reference to that in social media. And of course, the social media had all kinds of personal information along with it, like your name and your address and your phone number and all this sort of stuff. So it's a pretty useful tool if you're trying to spot something. There was all sorts of controversy about this, but, so essentially you feed a CCTV image capture from the fuel station in Exeter, Rhode Island into the database, and that naked guy pumping high test into an aquarium at 3 a.m. crying, also happened to have posted a picture of him playing with the band Slick Willie back in 2010. And, the system says, and apparently it works, that it can actually go in, link that stuff together, find that picture from 2010 and the band name and the members of the band, and take all that and then match that to the picture down at the gas station at 3 o'clock in the morning with a crying guy pumping gasoline into the aquarium. And that would be pretty useful if you're law enforcement, right? Because you're going, who is this idiot? And then you punch it in and go, oh, his name is Bill and here's where he lives. And yeah, I mean, it's not quite Minority Report, but it's off in that direction, right? I mean, it's starting to get into that sort of creepy feel. Anyway, the ACLU, that's the American Civil Liberties Union in the United States, sued Clearview with claims that it had violated the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act. So this was a state law that was passed. And that act requires explicit consent to collect biometric data, including images. In a settlement that is reported in this article, Clearview has promised, and companies never break promises, Clearview has promised that they will stop selling their database to most private companies, and there's a whole list of exceptions, and that they would, and other organizations, except for law enforcement and government, who they're going to keep selling to. So it sounds a lot like, NSO Group and Pegasus and all that kind of stuff too. Is like, we only sell to the good guys, even though we don't really worry too much about, if you got government in your name, you must be a good guy. The deal has not been accepted by the U.S. courts at this point, but they were also in this settlement prohibited from sharing this database with state and local governments in Illinois for 5 years. And they have to allow Illinois residents a way to opt out, and they had to put some money behind that with ads saying you can opt out of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I guess they scrub your images out of there. I'm not sure, but only in Illinois. So if you live in Rhode Island, that does not apply. Apparently, they can no longer sell the trained database. So this is the one that used the scraped images to private U.S. entities, but they can still sell it to law enforcement, and said that they fully intended to do so. The whole thing reads like something where they're just going to be, able to go around this anyway. I mean, like now they sell the database to some Yemeni company because that's not part of the deal, and the Yemeni company repackages it and sells access remotely to U.S. entities. I mean, I don't think that this is going to help very much. But hey, they promised. But at least the ACLU is trying. The Better Cybercrime Metrics Act was signed into law last week by U.S. President Joseph Biden. This new law requires that the Department of Justice, which is the head federal law enforcement agency in the United States, to work with the National Academy of Sciences to develop law enforcement data that can be used to categorize different types of cybercrime. So I guess this has never been done before. It also says that the Department of Justice must establish a category in the National Incident-Based Reporting Systems for cybercrime reports from federal, state, and local officials within 2 years. The law goes on to require that the GAO, which is the sort of United States Government Audit Office, it's actually the Government Accountability Office, but they do audits and things like that. They're requiring them to report on the effectiveness of existing cybercrime mechanisms and look at disparities in reporting cybercrime versus how other types of crime data in the U.S. is reported. So it's a real push forward. So maybe better data will start to emerge, and of course then people can study it and try to find out. Still not sure how the West Niblick County Magistrate will track down those Nigerian princes, but you just never know. Given that you can rent DCRAT. So listen to this. You can rent DCRAT for only $7 on a Russian forum for 2 months. I mean, how long do you need this thing for? DCRAT, or it's also called Dark Crystal, is a Windows Trojan that was developed by someone named Boldenis44 or Bold Enos, I don't know, but also called Crystal Coder, or the word coder in Russian. But DCRAT is deployed by finding some way into the network, usually with credential stuffing or brute forcing or whatever. And then it has a client executable in .NET that steals data and exfiltrates it, a PHP page that connects to command and control server and can be used to download other things, and it also has an administration tool. The product is described as under active development, according to BlackBerry Research, and basically, I think this is the advent of the deep discounter dark website. Come on down to Crazy Eddie's slightly used bots and malware, where our low prices and great customer service mean you always get the best deal on malware that has only been driven to church on Sunday by a little old lady from Minsk. Yeah, that kind of thing. All right. One of the few remaining pen testers trained in the old ways. He still does everything by hand, the way his ancestors did it. All natural, simple, organic pen testing. It's a pen test with the smell of a wood stove burning in a plank building in the 17th century while bread bakes. Working tirelessly, lit only by ox-fat candles, it's a pen test from a simpler time when master craft people pen testers did red teaming the way their fathers did pen testing. Come home to Simple Jason. Please welcome Jason Wood.
And I want you to know there are no genetically modified pen tests involved anywhere in there. So this news actually comes from late last week. Last Friday, the U.S. Treasury Department announced that a cryptocurrency mixing platform has been sanctioned by the agency. So they have now joined the ranks of things like North Korea and terrorist groups and all kinds of other stuff as to organizations that nobody's allowed to do business with, particularly if you are in the U.S. or some way associated with that, with the country. So, this in the announcement, they made the comment. This is the first time that they have announced sanctions against a platform like this, against a cryptocurrency mixer. And I thought it was kind of interesting that they talked about this being the first, which kind of implies that there's going to be a second and a third. So we'll see how this turns out. Definitely some room in this as you read through the article. I've got the link to the Vice article in the show notes, which then links to the announcement by the Treasury Department. But the sanctions were applied to a platform named Blender, which is supposedly available at blender.io, even though I found I couldn't reach it, because it provided its services to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, otherwise known as North Korea. Now, I had a segment a number of months back that talked about cryptocurrency mixers and what they were, but I'll just recap again, maybe for folks who missed that. Because at the time, I had never heard of this. This was something I had to do some reading on to figure out what these services are even in the first place. The idea here is let's obscure the flow of cryptocurrency tokens, from point A to point B. So it's kind of a mixed use kind of service. You can see where maybe this would be interesting for illegal activity as well as for folks who are concerned about privacy. Because after all, if I was to be purchasing things with cryptocurrency tokens and I decided I don't want anybody to see what I did with this. I want to have some privacy around whatever my purchases were or whatever it is I was doing with it. I could buy my tokens, let's say, on a cryptocurrency exchange like Coinbase or something like that, and you send the tokens over to a currency a mixer, and the mixer holds on to this for some period of time. Usually months, so this is not something you're going to do on a whim. And at a random interval, at some point later, the tokens get sent out of this pool of tokens that they've aggregated from all kinds of different people. When they send that out to the wallets you've designated to receive the tokens that that I wanted to obscure. And the idea here is nobody can really prove that this wallet is under my control, because was it really me? Was it Jason who went and did this, or was it somebody else's tokens that came out of this mixer? And we can't prove that they belong to me, that I initiated this purchase. And, obviously the exchanges, they're going to know who I am. They've got my bank information. They have to report stuff for taxes, so they can readily identify me to a warrant or subpoena. So again, the idea here is just to obscure what's going on. Now, there's a couple of interesting things I find to be interesting about I find wild about these mixers, which is you send the money over, we'll hold on to it, and we pinky promise that we will deliver your tokens to the wallets of your choice at some point in the future, which we can't tell you exactly when that's going to be. And but they'll show up there, and then for some percentage, I think up to like 2 to 3% of it, plus some fees, that they'll take out of it. They'll remove that and then deposit the rest into the wallets that you have designated. Pretty big leap of trust if you're talking about significant amounts of money. So I found that to be relatively interesting, and I'm kind of actually wondering, hey, now that they've been sanctioned by the Treasury, Blender has been sanctioned by the Treasury Department, if I had tokens in the pool there, would I be able to get them back, or am I just out of luck? Now, as you can imagine, this idea of obscuring the flow of tokens is obviously going to be of interest to criminals, ransomware gangs or whatnot. In this particular case, the case cited by the Treasury Department is basically an intrusion that was supposedly committed by North Korea. That resulted in these Blunder's involvement of them mixing $20.5 million worth of tokens to launder them. The tokens originated from an intrusion at a gaming company called Axie Infinity. There was basically, they got broken into $625 million in tokens and other assets, I guess, digital assets, were taken from the users of the game and the company and then transferred off and around. Law enforcement's obviously going to be investigating this, and they were able to tie Blender to this intrusion, at least to the tune of a percentage of this, of the $20.5 million in assets. As a result of this, they've now found themselves on the receiving end of the sanctions. Now, there's a couple of reasons here. It seems like they're doing this. They got it. First off, the Blender provided their services to the DPRK, or North Korea, which was in violation of sanctions that had been applied to them. So they broke the rules there. Secondly, they were part of laundering, basically these tokens from an intrusion, and so you got that end of it as well. So yeah, that's how they found themselves in this situation. What does this actually mean? Now, this gets a little bit strange as I'm reading the statements from the Treasury. I'm not sure how to take all of this, but they make it pretty clear that they do not like mixer services, and so I would expect that more mixers may find themselves on the receiving end of this type of activity. But as far as somebody here in the U.S., if you're a resident of the United States or in some place that the U.S. can apply pressure and have enforcement take place, we're no longer allowed to use Blender. There are things, if you own a certain amount of an entity that did do or is doing stuff with Blender that is supposed to be blocked, and if you have like greater than 50% ownership of it, that's supposed to be blocked, and you're supposed to be reported to OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control, so that they can follow up with whatever investigations they're going to do. Any transactions, like if I was to use go back to my Coinbase example and try and buy something or send it off to a mixer, that should be blocked. The exchanges themselves, like Binance and others, would no longer allowed to be to process these or interact with Blender themselves. Any blockchain technology companies or services or anything around that, again, if you get initiated a transfer over there, not allowed to do it. And on top of that, blocking by some mechanism, it's all supposed to be reported back to OFAC for follow-up by the United States. So I was kind of curious. I was like, well, does Blender have a response to this? What are they saying about this sanction? So I tried to access their site at blender.io, and I realized, it's apparently blocked. I can't reach it. So I'd have to mess around with some VPNs or Tor or something like that to pop out somewhere else in the world. So yeah, it sounds like that's been pretty well, blocked off, and it is no longer possible. Again, I suspect more announcements, though, are going to take place around this, because we've got 625, just this one intrusion, 625 million in some kind of asset that has been stolen, and Blender only got a small percentage of that. There's still another 600 million or so of it hanging around out there. So I imagine they're following up on that, and if they find other services they can prove that were part of this, then I would expect them to go after them for it, for the exact same reasons of dealing with North Korea and taking part of this intrusion. This Treasury's statement itself was pretty explicit about their views on the whole concept of this, and I'll just kind of wrap up with this quote. The virtual currency mixers that assist criminals are a threat to U.S. national security interests. Treasury will continue to investigate the use of mixers for illicit purposes and consider the range of authorities Treasury has to respond to illicit financing risks in the virtual currency ecosystem, end quote. So yeah, basically, there's kind of a warning shot, folks. They're looking at this. They're not happy about it. If they get a whiff of anything that they decide is illicit, which obviously, like the Axie situation is very obviously such, then they're going to see what they can do to curtail those activities and impede these services. So keep an eye out. I expect to see more announcements like this, and the whole concept behind it just kind of wild to me in the first place. So we'll see how this develops over time.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Kind of smells like money laundering, but, who knows?
Just a little bit like money laundering.
I'm sure it's all legitimate.
Just a little bit.
I'm sure it's all completely legitimate. But governments love cryptocurrency. And finally, back in 1997, on the 9th of May, which was yesterday, not yesterday was the 9th of May, 2022, Luc Besson released a film that, you really hate it, but you can't quit watching it kind of film. I couldn't resist talking about it because it is kind of a hacker movie of sorts. I got that book about hacker movies, and I looked it up, and, it's in there. And it definitely has a kind of hacker feel to it anyway. But Mila Jovovich is some sort of wayfish alien who can only say the word multipass in a kind of strange way. Bruce Willis, action hero guy, flying cars. I mean, it's definitely noticeable for its look and feel. I mean, it's got this very, I don't know, there's just this sort of look and feel to it. And if you're around then, it was a brave new time in the 90s, because suddenly there were, you were starting to see the very front end of CGI and other tech that meant that some of these classic sci-fi books and things got actually, made. They'd never been really makeable before. And, now this movie was still in the realm of old school effects, without a doubt. I mean, if you go watch it, it's still very got that animatronic feel to it and so forth. It was before The Matrix, when they showed up and they had all these really nice, really nice CGI, or at least early nice CGI. And this one has all the classic kind of gassy effects of the old days in there. But, it is one of my favorite Philip K. Dick short stories that got made into a film. And in 1990, another Philip K. Dick story had a really similar look and feel to this, called Total Recall. And I didn't really like that film either. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was directed by Paul Verhoeven. It's okay, but it's very, if you watch it today, it feels very, very dated. But the story by Philip K. Dick was called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, because Philip K. Dick never had great, he didn't name stuff, really cool Hollywood ways like Total Recall. But these were two very similar films from that era. And The Fifth Element had it all. It had corny plots, weird aliens. It had Gary Oldman, who's always awesome. I mean, it's not Gary Oldman as Drexel Spivey awesome, but it's still pretty cool. And The Fifth Element, it was never my favorite movie, but it did really start to usher in an era that started with Total Recall and led to that coming, CGI era that led to the Marvel Universe and all this stuff we see today. I do think it's kind of a hacker movie, so if you've never seen it, it is streaming. You can check it out. It is fun, and that's the news. Thanks, Jason. I will be out this Friday, but the estimable Jason Wood will be filling in for me. See you then.